My dad was standing in the living room in front of the television set, and he was holding his head in his hands, moaning, "My son is a moron." Well, I just told my dad I would be hitchhiking across country and back. It was between my freshman and sophomore years in college. It wasn't the send-off I was hoping for from him. But as I took off to get into a new environment, because I was tired of this one, I recognized something. I went across the Rocky Mountains, went across over to Washington, D.C. I went up to Niagara Falls, to Montreal, and returned a month later. But here's what I found. I couldn't really get away. Wherever I went, there I was. Because what had really been bothering me was me. My habits, my temper, my lack of discipline. So the environment that I really sought, I figured I'm going to have to take that environment with me, and came to realize that I couldn't really get away unless the way got in me. Jesus is the way. When he gets in you and in me, we can enjoy the journey, enjoy that environment as well.
Good evening, everyone. Let's try that again, and welcome to day 3 of our 8 days, my first steps to better health. I'm excited to join you once again and to share this conversation time with a special guest who I'll introduce in just a little bit. First, I want to check and see who is joining us today. So if you are on Facebook Live watching this or on YouTube, please go ahead and say, "I'm here." Just type that in the comment section so that I know that you are here. Because as you will recall, um, if you attend all 8 days, then you will receive a special prize. And for those of you who aren't able to tune in live each night, that's okay. I've bent the rules a little bit. And as long as you tune in at some point to each of the 8 days, 8 principles, and let me know through the comments that you're there responding to different questions along the way, then I will count that toward your attendance. I was going to bring the prize that I'm giving out at the end of this tonight, and then I totally forgot to do that. So we are without the visual aid, but I promise you it's a meaningful one, and you will enjoy it if you are able to receive it. I want to touch on just a few things to recap. Yesterday, day 2, we looked at trust. And now, remember, we're not going through the word creation letter by letter exactly. We are moving here and there as schedules allow for those who are joining me on the broadcast. And so, yesterday we looked at trust and we spoke with Pastor Sherry Smith about her journey of trusting the Lord. And if you were not able to tune in, please, by all means, go and watch the replay. You can watch it on YouTube, you can watch it on Facebook. Definitely check that out because you will be blessed by what you hear. And on the first day, we talked about C, which stands for, if anyone remembers, choice. We are all able to make choices in our lives even when we don't think we can. And we went through an exercise together on Sunday about making choices. So I want to encourage you to definitely, if you haven't already gone through that exercise, take some time to do that, even as early as tonight. After you've watched this, go back to day 1 and catch up on what it means to make a choice that helps you to move in a new direction, helps you experience a new beginning. So we have had choice, we've had trust, and today we're on environment. And I have asked Scott Anderson, who is a history teacher to come and talk to us about the environment and what he has experienced, learned, valued as he has studied the environment. We want to not glean from him as an expert, though he may be an expert, but we want to hear from his experience because we know that everyone's experience differs in some way or another. And so we want to learn from his experience tonight. So, in just a moment, I'm going to have him, I'm going to bring him on. But just a reminder to you that if you let us know you're here, then I'll record that so that you can for sure get a prize at the end of these 8 days. Now, if you want to purchase the book, okay, this is the study guide. It is thick and it is wonderful. It has some really great questions at the end of each chapter that help you to really get a sense of how to work through the topic and give suggestions as well. If you are interested in getting the book, just go to our website. There it is on the screen, athensga.org/8days. And there you will find the registration page. If you register, if you donate $10, that will go toward our health ministry, then you will receive one of these books and you will enjoy it. I really, really believe that you will enjoy it. So if you're wanting to do that, by all means, go ahead and do that. And there are a couple of different options for paying for the book if you so choose to get it. Okay, I think those are all of my general announcements for today. And so now I'm going to bring on our guest for today, Scott Anderson. Hello, Scott. Let me unmute you. There we go. How are you?
I'm well, Pastor Michaela. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I am trying to figure out again how to split this screen. See, I think I've got it, and then I don't. And so I'm trying to, there we go. Yay.
There it is.
I did it. Well, welcome, Scott. I want to ask you some questions about the environment and your own personal experience. When we hear the word environment, our minds go all over the place, potentially. We probably have at least 10 different answers to what we're thinking about when we think about the word environment. And so maybe we'll start with that. When you think of the word environment, what comes into your head?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I was really excited when you gave me the opportunity, and environment was one of the things that was an option, first off, because I feel as though the environment is so important. Albert Einstein, I think he said it best when he said the environment is everything that isn't me. And so when I think about the environment, it could be where I'm at right now. It could be the world that I live in. It could be my workplace. Basically, it's whatever place I am in, that is my environment. And that's how I think of it. And I think when we think of it that way, it definitely helps broaden our horizons on what the environment is and the role that it plays in our lives.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you began with that because right now, especially at least in the North American context, but certainly elsewhere in the world, environment, the topic of the environment can be a contentious topic. And so to start with the way you have framed it, I think is such a helpful way to look at it and to begin this conversation. So tell me, what is it about the environment that is not only interesting to you, but makes it a priority to you? Why were you happy to talk about this?
I think for me, it's just the idea that it is the one thing that impacts my life every day. Whether I'm sleeping, whether I'm awake, again, whether I'm at home or school, or even in the car, traveling, church, it is something that it has a meaningful impact in who I am and what I'm experiencing. And I think you make a great point when we talk about it being contentious, when we think about some aspects of the environment. But really, when we look at it from a micro level and then we work out to a macro level, where we start small and we think about the room that we're in. Right now, you and I are in different rooms, And I imagine that these rooms are set up to our own preferences and to our own style and also to our own levels of comfort. And we kind of work out from there into our homes, into our communities, into the places that we live. And the goal should always be to make the environment, whatever our definition is, a more welcoming and a better place for everybody who's in it. In this room, in your room, we're individuals. But really, when we start looking at it from a community standpoint, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to make the environment better for everybody?
Hmm. So when you think about making the environment better for everybody, and maybe working from the micro level to the macro, where do you begin in your processing about that?
I think, again, beginning at the micro level, I have to think about who I am as a person. And we all know that God has made us different. We all have different things that bring comfort to us. For me, it's more natural tones and maybe natural light. It may be soft music. It may be different smells that are comfortable for me. In the classroom as a teacher during the day, I have over 100 different kids in my classroom.
Hmm.
And I generally start off the year telling them that I spend more time awake in that room than I'm going to spend anywhere else during my day. And so they understand right away the importance of that environment. And I
Mhm.
try to find a nice blend between my comfort and their comfort. Sometimes that could be the temperature. That's something that we don't always think about when we think about the environment. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? It could also be the lighting. A lot of times we don't have the harsh fluorescent lights on because I know that makes me uncomfortable. It can give me a headache, it can strain my eyes. And so again, the students and I, we always find that balance of what works for everybody. It's got to be bright enough that you can see your paper, but at the same time it shouldn't be so bright that you're getting headaches and you just have this strain and the stress that's always there. And so when I think about the environment, I try and find those little things. Sometimes it can be as simple as a plant or pictures that make us feel comfortable or even just a texture thing. I have a desk pad on my desk. So instead of a hard, solid surface, I have something that is still steady, it's still firm, but it's also got a little bit of give to it. And so it sends that sensory aspect because our largest organ is our skin. And our skin is what we're used to feel, and we feel a lot of different things in our environment through our skin. And so it starts with just those small little things when
Mhm.
we're looking at that environment.
Mhm. Mhm. What are some challenges you find when thinking about the environment and sharing your environment?
I think, again, a lot of that goes back to the fact that we're all created differently. What may be comfortable for one may not be for others. I found earlier in my teaching, I'm not old by any means. I want to go ahead and get that out there. But earlier in my teaching, I used to keep my room super frigid and chilly, and I would tell the students, bring a jacket, maybe even a blanket. But now, as I find myself getting more towards middle age, I keep my room a little bit warmer. And sometimes we have to find that happiness, that medium. I know living with my wife, she often feels cold a lot quicker than I do. So again, it's the same thing. And a lot of it goes back to just not being focused on self. It goes back to thinking about others that we share our environments in,
Mhm.
whether it's our room. Now, lucky enough, here at the house, I have my own office, which is kind of my own thing. My wife has her own space, and we're blessed enough that we can kind of mold those to ourselves. But at the same time, we have shared spaces. And whether it's in a house, whether it's a workplace, whether it's again the communities that we live in, we have to make sure that we're thinking of everybody and not just ourselves because everybody else has environmental needs as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Have you always felt this way about the environment, or can you look at maybe pinpoint a time where you intentionally grew in your thinking? Because you talked about, the selfish aspect or the selfless aspect of sharing and considering others. And so I wonder, yeah, what's been your growth in this process?
I think the growth has a couple different starting places. Again, because there's so many different definitions of environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you get married, obviously you're kind of moving in with somebody else and you begin to realize, even more so than when you were dating or when you were in the relationship, that, hey, I've got to share this, you know, space. We've got to cohabitate in peace. And so we've got to start thinking of each other. Maybe, you know, it's not 60 degrees in the house in the wintertime. Maybe it's going to be 65 because my wife is, you know, going to get cold at night. Or maybe I go and buy a nice blanket for the bed so that we can have the best of both worlds. And it's the same way with the classroom. Again, the students, they've got to be comfortable in so that they can learn. And I think that really started kind of hitting me my first year as a teacher, when you understand that it's not just the Mr. Anderson show, it's all of us kind of working together to make this, in that situation, a learning environment, productive for everybody, so that they feel valued, they've got input. And then also, again, I'm spending 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day in that one environment. I've got to make sure that I'm not going crazy just because I'm living up to somebody's expectations or what makes somebody else comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, finish.
I was going to say, when we think about the environment as a whole, I think for me, growing up in church, being involved with Pathfinders and outdoors, that kind of stuff, seeing and thinking about the idea that at the macro level, this big level, God created this earth for us, but not just so that we can use it, but also so that we can take care of it. And looking at the Garden of Eden, the question is the world that I'm kind of providing for myself and maybe for others, is it more like the Garden of Eden? Is it what God wants it to be? Or is it what man, you kind of talked about that selfish aspect, is it what man is trying to make it so that we can, whether it's profit or whatever it may be, are we staying true to God's design with our environment? And I think that for me kind of kicked in my second year at UGA, taking a lot of environmental history courses and seeing and understanding through books, through lectures, just kind of how we've sometimes manipulated the Bible to fit our idea of what we needed to do or what God's plan was for us with the environment. And then kind of stepping back and making sure that I stay true to what God's intention was for us to take care of it and to tend to it, rather than for us to shape it and mold it to our benefit and kind of leaving his idea.
Did you talked about, God's ideal? How has, and I'm thinking of like maybe when you were a teen and younger, maybe if you can reflect clearly on that aspect in this regard. How
I told you I'm not old.
Well, I know for myself, there are a lot of details I don't seem to remember, but so I don't want to assume you'll remember it all. But do you remember within the church context? Do you remember being taught to value the environment? Like, was that part of the conversation that took place in a church context?
I think it was probably not in so many words, but again, it's that idea of looking at God's creation, thinking about what all goes into creation. Our God is not a random God. He's not a God who does things without putting thought into it. And so, whether it was camping with Pathfinders or going on backpacking trips with church members, and just those quiet moments of being in nature and taking in what God has given us. It really is miraculous. It's an amazing thing. Kind of in my later teen years, understanding that my favorite Bible character is Enoch, right? Not a lot written about him, but we know that he was one with God. He would go into the cities and he would preach, but then he would also remove himself and he would spend time in nature. And nature's kind of God's first book. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn through nature from God. And just to think about how when we remove ourselves from the nature aspect of the environment, when we kind of get away from the natural process of things, we're removing ourselves from God's original plan. God has when I work outside, when I work in the garden, or whether I'm just mowing the grass, I did that for the first time yesterday. Just seeing how God works and how everything works together to bring life, and even in death there's life. And it's just, again, it's amazing to sit back and look that God has created all of this for us, and there's so many lessons in there. And again, I appreciate growing up with several church members who were passionate about the outdoors and getting outside and just getting away and spending that time in nature. And I believe time spent in nature is time spent with God, and I really value that.
Now, I'm going to guess at the answer to my next question, which is when it comes to the environment, what's your favorite space to be in? I'm going to guess it's outside somewhere. Um, but what is your favorite space and why?
Oh man, I think my favorite space right now, just because it's always so close, is just our backyard. Last year, about this time, we were in the middle of not really knowing what was going on in the world.
Right.
We're both teachers. He was in first grade last year. Our son was. Our daughter was just a year old, and we were trapped at home together, not really knowing what was going to happen. Right? We knew all sorts of things, but there were things that we didn't know. And in our backyard, there's a little koi pond that somebody had put in the past, and it's nice and shaded, but there's also sunlight that kind of comes in through the leaves in the springtime. And as things were beginning to blossom and bloom, you had flowers, you had, again, the leaves in the trees were coming out. And it was just a beautiful experience to go out there and sit, and the water would be running. And sometimes you would hear the frogs jumping in and out of the water, and you could watch the fish swim around, and the lily pads blooming. All that was just, it was just wonderful to sit there and know that all this was going on in the world. All this, these questions and this wondering what the future is going to hold. But we could sit there in our backyard and just kind of remove ourselves from it. It was almost like a sanctuary, which was a beautiful thing. There's another place, and again, there's so many awesome places that are just nature filled in this area. If you're in the Athens community, there's the Bear Hollow Zoo, and it's an old zoo, nothing impressive. But the most impressive thing to me is looking up and seeing these giant trees that have been there 75, 100 years. And just looking up, one time we were at the zoo and my wife and I were looking up at this tree, and somebody came by and said, "What do you see up there? What are you looking at?" And we said, "We're just looking at this tree." And they were disappointed because it was nothing special to them. But you think about this tree and all that it's been through and what it can kind of symbolize, this growth and everything that goes on in this. So that's also a special place. Any place that has big trees, I love, because again, there's just this, maybe it's the history aspect of it and thinking what has happened here, or just the undisturbed aspect. The fact that you're going to have a tree that's 100, 150 years old, that's a place of nature that hasn't been disturbed, and it hasn't really been infiltrated with a lot of the stuff that we might find as a distraction today.
I love that you talked about looking up at the trees um, because I was at Bear Hollow maybe 3 weeks ago, and when you said, the trees, I was just like, huh? But it made me realize that so often when I'm out walking in nature, I'm looking down, like I'm looking at where I'm going and hopefully not tripping over things, especially, with my kids. It's like, okay, are we staying stable? And maybe if I'm looking up, I'm looking maybe just straight or, ahead or around at eye level. But then, yeah, always looking for that more special thing. But to be able to slow down enough to appreciate the things that are right there in our environment, like trees, and appreciate their history. I feel like that's such a great lesson for each of us when it comes to our environment. So thank you for sharing that, and I'm going to do better at looking at the trees, um, and appreciating those parts. Um, what decisions, what choices have you made to improve your environment, or in some way leave it in a better condition for your children or for others?
I think there's a couple different aspects there, kind of like we've talked about. There's the environment that we live in, and hopefully with our family, just raising our kids to, and as a parent, this doesn't always work out the way you hope, but raising your kids to kind of take care of the environment that they live in, picking up after themselves, decluttering. And again, anybody who knows me knows that we're not perfect in this, but you always have goals and you have things that you're working towards.
Yeah.
And just ourselves being aware of the impact that an uncomfortable environment has on us. Sometimes when we come home from a long day of work, working second jobs, whatever it may be, we just we don't really feel like we need to, or we have a lot of energy to invest in ourselves and our environment. And sometimes,
Mhm.
we let things sit around, maybe dishes in the sink or laundry that needs to be done, and just kind of staying on top of those things, finding that balance between rest and knowing that it can wait. You don't have to stress yourself out, but also being aware of the subconscious pressure and kind of stress that that kind of stuff creates anyway. It's something that we don't always think about until maybe it's gone and we say, all right, I feel better about things. So just making sure that our family is aware of those things and that we're working on what we need to work on. Looking at the macro kind of stuff, because I feel so passionate about it. And some of those classes at UGA really worked on being able to look at the environment that we create and understanding why we create it and how we can make it better. Um, and just again, looking at it from a community standpoint and understanding that it's not just us. It's not just what we want to focus on, what our environment is, but looking at our neighbor and looking at those who are around us. And like your question asked, looking at what we're doing for those in the future. When we lived out in Oglethorpe County for a while, and we lived in what is basically an open field where somebody 20 years ago said, "Hey, I'm going to build some houses here." And when we moved in, there were no trees, very minimal landscaping, and that was one of the first things we did when we moved in there. It was an acre and a half, and I think in the year, what we were probably there 8 years, we planted over 50 trees.
Wow.
Um, and so we drive by there every time we're back out that direction, and we look at the trees and we look at the bushes and how they've grown and how it's kind of impacted the landscape. The saying is, of course, the best time to plant trees was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And
Right.
it's kind of the same thing with our environment. The best time to work on it, the best time to improve it would have been in the past, but we can't go back in time. We can do it now. And so finding ways that we can set up the environment for those who are coming behind us and make sure that we're using it responsibly and thinking about future generations, so that they can really benefit from it.
Mhm.
Because when we look at the big picture, we only have one environment that the community can be part of. And
Mhm.
it's not as though you can just redesign it like you might redecorate your living room or your office space. It's one of those things that once something is done, it's hard to undo. And because of the time that nature moves in, it's going to take another 150 years for that tree to get just as big as it might be today. And those trees, again, we know that nature has a calming effect on most humans just because, and again, I think it goes back to the way we were created.
Right.
God created us to be in a garden. And so, as much garden aspect as we can bring into our lives and to our community, I think it really has a calming effect. Not to get too long winded on this, but I was reading an article just last week about inner city housing and
Mhm.
just the fact that they could go and tear down an old house and clear out all the dead brush, plant a tree and plant some grass, and crime would drop 29%.
Yeah.
I think that right there, it shows a huge impact that environment can have.
Mm-hmm.
just on our lives and our outlook on things when we see this world, whether a person is a Christian or not, we still are created the same way by the same God, and we can still benefit by the same things that He gave us in the beginning. And
Mm-hmm.
it's awesome to see those tangible differences that an environment can create.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I was just thinking about the fact that not once have you mentioned recycling, which is wonderful because it helps us realize that there is this. I would say that the way you've talked about the environment is a more holistic approach. You know, just like the way that we're spending these 8 days is looking at these 8 different aspects of health, not just one. And it's not bad to just look at one, just like it's not bad to just focus on recycling for a bit, but it's wonderful and refreshing to see it in this more holistic fashion. And so, thank you for sharing your experience with us. If you could leave anybody with just maybe one piece of encouragement as they think about their environment or the environments that they occupy, what would you say?
I would say go ahead and get started. Look at where maybe you are right now. When you go to work tomorrow, look around and ask yourself what is comfortable about this space. Starting in that small area, the micro level, and saying, am I comfortable here? If you're not, make some changes. When I started changing my classroom, it was literally walking across the road and going into Family Dollar and spending $15 on 2 lamps and turning off the fluorescent lights, opening up the blinds, and turning on the lamps. Even though my principal said, it's a fire hazard, I still did it anyway. And the kids noticed, and it made a big difference. And so, looking at the micro level, the best thing to do is just go ahead and get started. And again, remember, God placed us in a garden. The closer you can get to a garden and that kind of calming influence, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Potted plants are cheap. Go to Lowe's, get yourself a pothos, ask Pastor Michaela. She can
I can
probably,
give you some.
yeah, they're super easy to start. You just cut them and plug them in some dirt.
Yeah.
And then, it livens up the room. It cleans the air, stuff we haven't even talked about, just making,
Mm.
again, those small little subtle differences that you may not be able to see. And then at the macro level, again, understanding, go back and look at Genesis and see what God calls us to do with this place that He's given us. I think of the man with the servants, and he gave them all something,
Mm-hmm.
and each of those men did something with it. And God has entrusted this earth to us, and we've got to think about, are we really doing the best with it? And again, it might be recycling. I like the idea of reducing before we recycle.
Yeah.
Go and look at ways that we can just make those subtle differences. Last year, my son's school, they just started recycling soft plastic, and so we had a giant 50-gallon garbage bag just of soft plastics, and we didn't realize how much we were using
Mm.
just going to the store and not using reusable shopping bags. And finding, we talked about this today in class. Back in the 50s, each person created on average, or each family created 2.7 pounds of garbage a week or a day. I don't remember. But now it's more than doubled um, that, because we are so wasteful and we're not conscious of what we may be doing. And again, I think that God has gifted us this awesome place. Get outside, the fresh air, everything will just make it better. And the more time we spend in that environment, I think the more we want to care about it and the more we want to take care of it.
Yeah.
And so, again, just get outside and appreciate, especially as spring rolls around, this awesomeness that if you're not in Georgia, hopefully your spring is as beautiful as ours is. Um, if not, I would tell you to move here, but that's probably a lot of carbon. So just stay where you're at and enjoy, and enjoy your own local spring and whatever blessings God has given you. Because God, again, He blesses us all, which is really awesome to think about.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been great. And I hope that for those of you who are tuning in, that you will share this with somebody, and that you yourself will maybe even re-watch it to be reminded of what we can truly learn about the environment, our environment, and how this really is a blessing to our health. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Michaela.
Take care.
You too.
Ah, that was great. I love being able to hear other people's perspectives, and this has been wonderful to hear Scott's perspective on this. Um, if you've been tuning in, I would love for you to comment right now. You know, what is, oh, Janet says, thanks, Scott. What is something, what is one thing about your environment that you love? Okay, so that's the first thing. What is one thing about your environment that you love? Post about that. And it can be any environment, whether it's your home environment, your work environment, some space that you occupy. What's one thing you love? And then the second thing is, what is something about your environment that you'd like to change? What is something you'd like to change? Because remember now, we all have the power to choose. We talked about that on Sunday. And so we get to make these wonderful decisions about aspects of our lives. Oh, Janet says lots of windows letting the sunshine in. I agree, Janet. When we lived in Knoxville, our house was an old house, and there were just windows on just about every wall, and it was wonderful. Oh, knock down walls and put in windows. So you love the windows and you want to create more. Wonderful. Hey, if you can do it, do it. Please do. And anyone else that's watching, please feel free to chime in too. What is one thing that you love about your environment, and what is one other thing that you would like to change? So we're going to switch gears a little bit, but I want to remind you that if you're tuning in and you want your attendance to count toward a prize, then you need to comment that you're here. At least say, you know, I'm here. At least do that much so that your attendance can be noted accordingly. Let's take a look now at what our textbook, our study guide, has to say a bit about the environment. Again, you can get this if you register. It's not too late to register. The benefits of registration are not only getting this book, but also then we have your information, not to spam you, but to share other health seminars and initiatives as they come along. And one of those that I will share with you briefly is that as a church, we are investing in creating a prayer garden, a space on our property that people can enjoy as a space that you can sit and you can pray, you can join somebody else. In that you can also just sit there by yourself, or you can, you know, bring a lunch and eat, as long as you don't leave your trash. And so we're hoping and we're grateful that we have this opportunity to create something that's not only for us, but is for anyone in our community. We're really excited about that. Kristen said, bringing in natural lighting, plants, and colors. Colors. I used to be terrified of colors. I never would have worn this blue. But color is wonderful, and you don't have to hire someone to know how to use color, although maybe some of us should. But that's another story for another day. Let's talk about environment. Let's look at what our textbook has to say about environment. It has a section here called homework. And it says, for starters, make your home an oasis, a fertile or green spot in contrast to the harshness of the world at large. It's so easy, I know for myself, to spend a lot of time investing in other spaces, or just, you know, your energy is spent in different things, and then you come home and you're like, I wish, I don't like, you know, again, we have choice. We have the power to choose. What choices can we make so that our home environment is one that really works well for us and is a place of of beauty and encouragement. You don't have to spend a ton of money, like Scott just shared with us. It's not about the finances, and sometimes you don't have to spend anything. I would turn my camera and show you, but I'm not going to do that. On my wall, Scott mentioned Pothos, and I have these little jars, baby food jars, empty glass jars, hanging on my wall, and in those are Pothos cuttings. So if you'd like some, you let me know, and we can set up a delivery. So there are ways that we don't even have to spend money to make our space a space that is more that is beautiful, that is calming, that is aiding us in our health. Remember, environment. This is one of the health principles. This isn't just some fluffy idea in the sky. This is truly a health principle. And maybe you're listening to this and you're saying, I've always spent time caring for my environment. I've always been intentional about it. I didn't realize it was such a big deal, but it is. It really is. And so, for those of us who maybe haven't found it as easy to just do that, what are these changes that we can make in order to create a more pleasing, a more fertile, as it said, space? And as Scott was talking about the fact that we were made to be in a garden. That was part of God's plan. How can we bring nature into our space in a meaningful way? You'll see I have a love for plants. I blame my mother. So, a quote here: of all God's gifts to the sighted man, color is holiest, the most divine, the most solemn. The most divine, the most solemn. When we think about the earth that we have been blessed with, and nature. Sorry, excuse my scarf thing is just deciding to come off my head. When we think about what God has given to us, and all of the colors, what a blessing, right? Nature is just screaming of all these blessings. Now, remember, at the end of each chapter, there's a skill builder. There's something that helps us to take this to the next level. And I want to share one of these with you quickly before we have to wrap up, which is in about a minute and a half. One thing it says here is clean up or organize something in your environment. A messy environment really can stress us out. It really can, right? It really can hinder our ability to enjoy our space, to be at peace, to be calm, and all of that, and make good decisions about other things. So how can you clean up or organize something in your environment? Another thing, choose a room to clean each day. Oh, you may say, but my rooms aren't really messy. Well, maybe you can declutter each day. And then another one says, choose a natural scent to improve your environment. I once heard someone talk about how with every season, they bring in a different scent into the home that reflects the season. So, around Thanksgiving, it would maybe be like pumpkin smells or apple cider, that kind of a smell. And that's one way, with maybe a plug-in or a candle, that's one way to shift this environment and make it that much more calming and peaceful. One more. I'll share one more. Plan a special outing to enjoy nature. As part of my church family, every third Saturday at 3 o'clock, we meet at a different space somewhere in Athens region, whether it's the Botanical Gardens or we haven't been to Bear Hollow yet as a group, but we've been to the Botanical Gardens. We've been just last week to Sandy Creek Nature Center, and we've been other places, and it's just this great time to intentionally be out there. And because of the pandemic, we can still, regardless of the pandemic, I should say, we can still be together and distant and enjoying each other and what God has created. So I want to encourage you and give you a little bit of homework to think about what is a choice you can make, just one choice that you can make today to create an environment for yourself in your home, in your workplace, wherever it may be, that really helps you to experience the blessings of God. I'm going to end now by just replaying the video that we played at the beginning.
My dad was standing in the living room in front of the television set, and he was holding his head in his hands, moaning, "My son is a moron." Well, I just told my dad I would be hitchhiking across country and back. It was between my freshman and sophomore years in college. It wasn't the send-off I was hoping for from him. But as I took off to get into a new environment, because I was tired of this one, I recognized something. I went across the Rocky Mountains, went across over to Washington, D.C. We were following a month later. But here's what I found. I couldn't really get away. Wherever I went, there I was. Because what had really been bothering me was me. My habits, my temper, my lack of discipline. So the environment that I really sought, I figured I'm going to have to take that environment with me, and came to realize that I couldn't really get away unless the way got in me. Jesus is the way. When he gets in you and in me, we can enjoy the journey, enjoy that environment as well.
As we wrap up, I just want to pray for you now. Dear God, thank you so much that you have given all of this to us. You've planted us in this space that in some ways is breaking down because of the choices we've made. In some ways maybe is frustrating to us because we just can't seem to make the time to attend to it. Lord, even tonight, give us ideas for the step we can take, just one step, to create environments that actually make a positive difference, and ultimately to create environments with your guidance and environments that will glorify you and be available to others and bless others too. Thank you in advance for all the ways that you're working in each of our lives. And we look forward to tomorrow and coming back together again. Thank you. Amen. Take care, everyone.